Your memory's working. You got it.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to make sure I didn't make a mistake if I referred to you.
Definitely. All right, we'll roll. So, guys, welcome to the Chief Life Podcast. I'm Matthias Turner, joined by co-host Stacey Lee Turner.
Hey, guys.
And today we're super pumped. We've got Anthony Metivier with us. Anthony, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Anthony is from Magnetic Memory Method. Can you explain exactly what that is, Anthony?
Yeah, it's memory techniques for mature learners of any age who want to go on mental adventures. So learning can become fun and easy and exciting and also really elegant in the sense of, I use this word magnet because magnets are great for putting things into place and having them stay where you put them so you can find them again later. But they have a second function, which is to repel certain things that are just not needed or not necessary. So it's all about focus and really having just the stuff that you need in place when you need it.
That's really cool. And I think as adults as well, some people tend to fall off the learning wagon. Like it's almost like they get the feeling of they're too old or they're not, right. They're too busy, or there's probably a lot of excuses that come into place. And do you kind of come up against these quite a lot?
Oh, sure. And it's paradoxical and ironic because usually the older you are, the better opportunities you have with memory training because you have so much personal history to draw upon. Whereas younger people, they face more challenges, I find.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about the schooling system in Canada where you grew up. Obviously, you're here in Brisbane now, but also for Maddie here in Australia. In the UK where I grew up, it was kind of like you're at school and this is where you learn, and then, you might do some further study and then it stops. Like you're not kind of encouraged to keep, it's like get your degree and then go and work.
Right.
So, I mean, that adult learning thing, people do it, and there are people that are hungry for knowledge, but it's not encouraged in the UK education system.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, there's lots of ideas of why there's an education system in the first place that is quite Victorian era and factory based and, training people to essentially be wage slaves for taxation purposes and yada, yada, yada. And there's truth to that. And then there's also, a limit to the truth in that. But at the end of the day, it takes all kinds of people, and it's not just about learning. Memory techniques are also about preserving your brain health and having the best possible life because you're just laser sharp in every scenario. So it doesn't have to be just about learning, in other words.
Yeah, and I mean, something that actually, before I dive into that, I want to go back into your background a little bit more. What led you to do this? Like, why did you ever come around to figuring out like memory techniques and wanting to help others to learn that?
Right. Well, thank you for that question because I'm a lot like the people I help, which is I had a very severe clinical depression, and it was in a dark place with suicidal intent. And basically what happened is I was in graduate school, hundreds and hundreds of books, and I'm not joking or exaggerating, but when you do a PhD, you are responsible for several hundred books and articles. And I had these field exams, they're called, to show up to, where in each one a committee of 7 professors sits around and basically drills you on your knowledge. And you will be called upon to name author, title of article, title of book, etc. Then you got language requirements, and you have a dissertation ultimately to write, which you then need to defend. So you got 3 exams in total. And I was on the way to the first one, and this depression hit like crazy. And I had a history of manic depression before this, but I always had the good stuff, right? Like, woo, I'm like totally on, the 7th cloud and all this. But then, they already started sending me the letters of when my student loans were going to be due. And then it was winter in Toronto, 14 foot of snow, et cetera, et cetera. So I just I'm going to jump off a bridge, or I'm going to go and to these exams and fail because I couldn't focus on a single sentence. I was so depressed. Or I'll become a magician. And that's when I And I kid you not, it was just like street magic had exploded at the time. YouTube was just emerging, and like this whole thing went viral, and you could just see magicians everywhere.
I hope you went for the third option. You obviously didn't go for the first option.
Oh, first I went for the street magician.
Awesome.
And, yeah. So that was the third option, and that's when I discovered memory techniques, because there's something in magic called any card at any number. There's different ways to do this trick. You would say King of Clubs, number 13, and it would be the 13th card in the deck. You can do this with sleight of hand, or you can do it with memorized decks plus sleight of hand, a little bit of sleight of hand. And I just thought, there's no way. But I followed the instructions, and because I could watch on video and I wasn't reading it from a book, I could follow it, right? Like I could concentrate on it. And then I realized when I memorized a deck in 15 minutes, holy cow, if I can get all of this philosophy on cards, if I can get all of this bizarre stuff from biblical Hebrew onto cards, same thing, I can do this. So long story short, I crushed it in all of these exams, and got my PhD, wound up with a what's called a Mercator grant from a major German institute, and was a guest professor for a couple of years in Germany, and I didn't really turn back after that. I just kept learning German and learning everything, went on tour with a band and all kinds of crazy stuff.
So did you know German before you moved there, or you learnt this along the way?
I had just a couple of classes in Manhattan where I lived for a while, and they were so painfully boring, and I didn't really have a strategy for learning German, so I just had some small exposure to it, but I learned it all in Germany.
Yeah.
Using your memory methods?
Yeah, it was shocking to people when I really started to ramp it up, because I'd come back like week after week with this enhanced vocabulary. And like it was just the oddest thing. If you think about learning a language, like pushing open a door and light keeps spilling in. And I was a film professor at the time, right? So I was just watching tons of movies, and every 10 or 50 or 100 words I'd memorize, the door just kept opening and the light kept spilling in, and I'd see it in context and hear all the language in context. And so this was sort of the genesis of my first book, that experience. And really it just comes down to memorizing lots and lots of vocabulary, and then experiencing it in sentences, and then putting it in reading, writing, speaking, and listening, out of memory and into memory, to serve this circle. So it's really profound and powerful.
Yeah,
and you don't have to live in a country for it to work, because I did it again with Chinese, and I didn't live in China. I did it while I was in Berlin. So,
and I mean, it's something that people come to you for, right? Because they say, hey, I want to learn a language, and it's often just thought like, oh, you can't do it as an adult. But it's like there's all these false messages that get put out there, like, oh, you're too old, or you can't do it as an adult. Whereas, like you said before, like it's almost better to do it now.
And it sounds like it's more the tools that are being used to teach the language are the issue.
Yes. Well, the thing is a lot of people will say, well, yeah, but kids, they just learn languages naturally. This is nonsense. Anybody who's been around children know that they take 6 to 7 years to learn how to formulate a properly grammatical sentence, right? Mm-hmm. And they do it through the thing that we lose as adults, right? Which is just random experimentation until you get it right, and not really getting our feelings hurt when we're corrected. So children just have this sort of looseness about it, but they take a long time. Whereas an adult, you can do in about 3 months to a year and a half what takes a child about 5 to 6 years. So,
wow.
And it's just because you have mature strategies for organizing your time, doing the discipline, and getting the result. So it's pretty exciting what an adult can do.
That's awesome. And so Maddie's given me an idea, I guess, a little brief overview of how you do it and the mechanisms that you use. Do you want to share that with the listeners of about the Mind Palace and all that sort of stuff?
Sure. Well, the Memory Palace or Mind Palace is basically creating a level of association that is, or it's like a canvas that you paint your associations on. So when Maddie and I met, I just met a bunch of people there, and I went around the room. And I remember there was a guy named Graham, for example. I actually heard William. I don't know if you remember that, Maddie, but I heard William, and I had to correct myself later. But I painted William Shakespeare on the canvas of the memory palace over his head. And then later he said, oh, actually it was William. And that was the first night there. There was this loud noise. And I said, oh, well, I got the yam part right. So I just put some graham crackers over there. And that's what I'm doing. I'm associating that person, in this case, with images and the very place that they are. And that really matters, that it's where they are at that moment. Because Maddie was sat in a different place. There was another Matt, if memory serves.
Yeah, correct.
And like Jesse, and I won't go through the whole list unless you want me to, but it can be boring listening to people recite information. But it's the same process of going around actual space. And then so that the next day I showed up and had everybody's name in my long-term memory. All I did is I went around that table in it was actually clockwise order. Yep. Then I went counterclockwise, and then I would skip them. So I would go from where Dean was sitting, and I would skip Graham and go to Jesse, and then I guess I was next to him and so forth. It was Scott that was beside me, and I would skip them. And the reason why you skip them is because you want to harness what's called serial positioning and primacy effect and recency effect. So it's just association, and then it's rehearsing the information in a way that's not rote learning. And the reason why it's not rote learning is because I'm not repeating their names. I'm asking my brain, what was that association? So when you make a mistake, for example, it's like, well, it's William, but it's actually Graham, And so because you're seeing this image now of William crushing up some graham crackers, and it's creative. It's so much fun. It's fast. And I will never forget any of those names because of just repeating it in a sort of sequential, counter-sequential, and randomized order, just mentally in my mind.
And did everyone sit in the same place on the next day?
No, it was all completely different. Like the first night.
We were in a different room, but it no longer mattered.
Because of the associations.
Right.
That's so cool.
And I do it a lot here in Brisbane. I mean, people are kind of blown away, but it's actually anything that anybody could do. I mean, it is impressive. I'm desensitized to it, but it's really shocking how easy it is if you just basically do what I just said. Create images and associate.
Sorry. Yeah, that's awesome. Sorry to interrupt you, because I just remembered that I think Maddie taught me the story that he learned. No,
that was from Julian's course that we went and did. Yeah,
different one. Okay.
So the Mind Palace has kind of been explained to me previously as like you can either build your own, or you could use your house that you already have. You can use a room in your house and start to like literally look around and say, okay, well I've got that painting and I want to attach this to that painting, and bits and pieces. So I mean, I definitely heard of it before meeting you, and I never really used it. I'd use different like stories to tell to kind of remember things, and that tends to work pretty well, like you just said, like just have that association with something. But I guess the question is, how do you then apply that to say a language? Like how do you use that same methodology for the language?
Yes, exactly the same. The thing that's different is that if you're going to tackle a language, you've got hundreds of words that you want to be doing in a relatively short period of time. I don't necessarily recommend that people think in thousands, even though there are thousands, but don't make it more difficult than it is. About 850 words is the average use in a daily conversation that you would need initially within 3 months of language learning. So here I get into like deep strategy, making sure those memory palaces are well formed to suit the purposes of language learning. So it's not just impromptu, hey, I'm at this meeting these people, I'll use this location and just build the memory palace as I go. It's more like, well, the alphabet has 26 letters, right? So I'm going to have 26 memory palaces. And those memory palaces are going to be tight. So I'm going to draw them to make my strategy so that I'm not leading myself into dead ends. I'm not crossing my path. So I can literally just go from station to station in this memory palace in a completely crisp, clean, refined manner so that I can do that station skipping, right? Go forward, backward. You start in the middle to the beginning, go to the middle to the end, and then 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. And then that's what gets it all into long-term memory. The beautiful thing is that you then go back and you add phrases to the individual vocabulary words. So, in Chinese, Jun Bei is like ready, as in, are you ready, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just first, there's a sign there's a place in Canada called Lac Lejeune, and I just have the Lac Lejeune sign there with Michael Bay punching it. Michael Bay, the director of Transformers, he's punching it. And then later, once I've got that established, in all of these words that are related to that sound, because it's in a J memory palace, Jun Bei, right? I go back and I just add a phrase. So it's like, Ni Jun Bei hao la ma, which means, are you ready, right? And I then see Michael Bay now, he's kneeing, the sign, and et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how you scale this. Because now not only do you have a bunch of words that are related in, say, a J memory palace, but you also have the ability to compound entire phrases onto those words and use other words. So within a very short period of time, you've got dozens of phrases and you're ready to rock. So that's how it works.
So within doing this, like, I guess at first look, it almost looks like you'd be taking on a lot more information than what you need initially, right? Because you're having this phrase go with this thing, exactly, and then it's like, oh, how's that place? Where's that sit again? And how's it place again? But I guess what you're saying is you need to have it like so certain in yourself with the stories and with the palaces you've already built, and that's probably exactly where your coaching comes into big play, right?
Yeah, I really focus a lot on the Abraham Lincoln wisdom. He said, if I got to chop down a bunch of trees, I spend 4 hours sharpening my axe. And 2 hours on the actual chopping. Yeah. So it's that's really what we're working at. And then and then you get to the level where you can make it up on the fly. But I often find, I'm years into this now, and I often find that if I take the shortcuts, I end up wasting time, and I should have just done it right in the first place. And that's why I focus so much on strategy, and it applies to other things too. I mean, you would have a different strategy for different things. So, but it relates in the same way. Like when I did my graduate thing, I realized that the best way to organize it was alphabetically and to work with philosophers. So, there's an Aristotle memory palace. There's an Aristotle memory palace for the Nicomachean Ethics. There's an Aristotle memory palace for rhetoric, etc. Right? Yeah. And so then you actually get an image in your mind of the person, the philosopher. You just follow them around the memory palace and have these other images. So it's really fun. It's like playing a video game in your head, essentially.
That's awesome. And it makes me think of a pyramid. Like, I love the analogy you use of sharpening the tool, but, in order to be able to put the top of the pyramid on, which is the word or the letter or the phrase, you need the foundations beneath. So it's like you've built this whole story underneath, and then you can just grab the thing off the top because it's right there.
Exactly. And that word foundation is important because a lot of, like Maddie, you're right, there's just dozens of stories out there about the memory palace or the mind palace. And usually the way they teach it is like this. Start at the door of your house and move your way in. 90% of people, that's just going to cause a lot of trouble because you're going to lead yourself into a dead end. And so I teach the foundations of making sure you don't ever lead yourself into a dead end, because a lot of people, and it's legitimate, I've dealt with thousands of people, they get what I call memory palace scarcity. I'm going to run out of room, so they don't even get started. Like they've decided it won't work in advance. And they're right, because if you lead yourself into a dead end, you're causing a mental shutdown before you even get started, especially if you're like, this language has thousands of words, or this fitness instructor program has thousands of terms or body parts or whatever. Like if you start thinking that way, you're going to fall into scarcity. So I set the foundations to think in abundance. Yeah, that's cool. Because your memory and your creativity is totally abundant. So you need the foundations.
Never ending.
Yeah, it's massive. And I guess, like, I'm just trying to think about the situations that I deal with regularly. And so many times people are like, oh, I'm just terrible with names. Or, like, there's common thoughts that people kind of keep among themselves. And I feel like having those thoughts would actually be very damaging to your own memory as well. Like, your memory would be like, yeah, that's correct. I am bad at remembering names. I'll just do that from now on. Is that such a thing?
Yeah, exactly. There is such a thing. It's called the primacy and the recency effect. And we tend to remember the things that we see first and last in a sequence better than anything else. So if you're constantly reinforcing this negative message, then it's going to have truth, and all you need to do is replace that message and think about what you are good at. because chances are you're way better at names than you think.
Yeah.
You know, like, what's your favorite sports team? Who's center left? Like, it's just bang, bang, bang. Well, how did you do that, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's like some natural powers going on. You just haven't realized it. So.
The things that people get passionate about are the things that they seem to remember.
And we just try to figure out how can we do that with information that we're not passionate about. And it turns out that it's pretty easy, because all those sports figures that you already know, they become tools in your memory, right? So I mentioned my mistake with Graham there, from all the loud noise and hearing William instead of Graham. Well, it's not like an accident that I chose Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't know sports very well, but I'll bet you any money that a sports fan knows a sports figure named William, right? Or Graham, for that matter. You know? So it's just like a lot of this art and science and craft of memory is just asking yourself, what do I already know that connects with this? And where in my mental memory, my spatial memory, am I going to map it? And the more you actually have your maps in advance, or your memory palaces, the easier it is. And the more you just realize, I already know all this stuff. Like that example from Chinese. I already know a place called Lac Lejeune. It could have been a June bug, or something like that I picked, and I already know Michael Bay. Nothing rocket science going on here. Yeah. It's just a kind of what I have come to think of as mental Lego. Just
it's like you said, just putting the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah. Anyway, I know not everybody in the world finds it as fun as I do, but I hope some of the passion rubs off, because it's just it's like the wildest ride.
Definitely, it sounds super exciting. It's definitely something that we need to explore more.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you mentioned obviously your own background and the history that you struggled with, and did you have an issue with your memory before doing your PhD that you were aware of, or was it this depression that kind of led you into this inability to focus?
Well, that's an interesting and great question. I think when I was depressed, I always had a problem with my memory, and it's not memory as such, but it's like concentration and focus, because you don't remember anything that you haven't gotten into your brain. It's just not possible. And then I did have a laser sharp memory, but it can be because I was just switched on during those sorts of periods. But now it doesn't really matter. Like we're all in Brisbane, right? And there's been like this sort of weather, and weather really gets to me. But it doesn't affect my memory. I still am memorizing, some new Chinese pretty much every day. I'm memorizing. I got this massive Sanskrit memory challenge. So I think I've been dealing with these kinds of depression, manic issues my whole life. But now I just have so many incredible tools because of what I discovered in memory. And I don't take medication at all anymore. I haven't taken medication for years for it.
That's so awesome. I was going to say, it has this way of practicing memory
helped.
Yeah, helped and healed you. So that's really cool to hear.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a PhD, so not a doctor. Run anything past an actual medical professional. But in my own life, I've used the tools to figure out better diet. I mean, I used to be quite overweight and swollen from taking lithium. Always unhappy about that. But when I started to switch on with learning and being able to quickly learn, then I got into physical modification very quickly and diet really deep into that, and that's changed everything.
That's awesome.
Yeah, very powerful.
And I mean, you seem like a very visual person. Like you have a good awareness of creating visions in your mind. Do you think it takes a certain type of person to be able to use the visions, or because some people are audible listeners, some people need to write stuff down? Would you say that there's a certain type of person that picks it up a lot faster than others?
That's a great question, and I'm so glad you asked it, because I'm not very visual, actually.
Oh.
Even though I was a film professor, I'm like super conceptual about all the film stuff that I know, and I was like, well, here's the mathematical formula behind this plot, but ask me about color, ask me about all this kind of visual stuff, I have no idea, because I don't really see pictures in my brain. I do see little things, but there's a condition called aphantasia, which is the lack of a mind's eye. I don't think that I'm quite in that realm, but I'm pretty close. So one of the things that I'm able to help people with is understanding that these techniques are not about seeing pictures in your mind. They don't have to. If you can, then by all means do. But I am friends with, some of the best memory competitors in the world, and I can tell you, they don't have time to see pictures in their mind. When they're doing a deck of cards in less than 17 seconds, they're not seeing pictures in their mind either. There's no time. They're using different tools, and those tools, if you want a little acronym that might help you remember it, think of a giant kangaroo punching a cave, and that cave is filled with some giant cogs, right? Cogs and wheels.
Yeah.
I don't know which cave. Maybe you have a cave that you've visited and you can get that in your mind. But it's a kangaroo punching it because that cave is spelt with a K, right? So it's K-A-V. Kinesthetic is the sense of feeling. Auditory is the sense of your hearing. Visual is whatever visual things that you have. I think everybody is a little bit visual, but you don't necessarily need to see pictures in your mind. You could just use words. Like, what would it look like if I could see pictures in my mind? And then you'll end up using all kinds of things. And then the cog part is your conceptual, which is like ideas, concepts that can be very useful. O is for olfactory, which is the sense of smell. And G is for gustatory, which is the sense of taste.
Yeah.
I might change that acronym later so I can get rid of olfactory and gustatory, but we're in the business of learning, so you don't want to throw away the complex words just to dumb things down.
Yeah,
but anyway, it's a way of understanding that everybody has a full, wide range of things to paint with, and it doesn't have to be pictures at all, because I'm not visual, and the best of the best don't have time to be visual. It's just not the way it works.
That's really cool.
So in an experience like that, where they are in a competition, for instance, like I've heard there's different number memory categories and stuff like that, where they'll read out a certain bunch of numbers to them, and they just have to remember lines and lines. I don't know what the biggest number someone's ever remembered. Do you know what that is?
Well, it depends on the nature of the competition or what they're going for. So Brad Zupp, I think he's now doing what's called the Mount Everest of numbers, which is in the thousands of digits for pi. But I really don't know how much time he has to do that.
Yeah.
But I think the recent USA memory champion, John Graham, he was it's like a short period of time, 5 minutes. He was up to like 380 digits or something like that. I regrettably didn't memorize all this data because, quite frankly, I don't really care about. But I know John Graham does, and we just interviewed him for my podcast, and like it's really, really impressive, and the specific numbers are impressive. But it's less than 500 digits in I think it's probably 5 minutes they gave him.
Yeah.
And you can go into all the nerdy stuff about the actual thing, but the reality is that what they're doing there is they're making associations really fast based on predetermined tools. So just as I'm saying, like, sharpen your axe before you chop the tree for large learning, these guys go in, and women too, actually. There's some very fierce women competitors these days now as well. They go in with those axes super sharp. Yeah. And as any competitive athlete knows, you've also got luck on your side. So, and I can't speak to every single competition, but normally all the competitions are point-based. So you're relying on the underperformance of your competitors on that day just as much as you're relying on your performance on that day. So, if you had if I had a bad weather day when I was competing, I would not expect great things, for example. Yeah. But if it was all sunny and shiny, I'd do a lot better. And you also have age categories too. So we know that the older competitors, you just have to hold them to a different standard because it's just not going to necessarily happen no matter how sharp their axe is compared to some of the younger people who really put in the time to practice their systems of association beforehand.
Do people use nootropics at all in this industry? Because obviously you're focusing on improving like brain capacity, brain function. Is it like something that you test for at the competitions?
That's interesting. I actually don't know if they do any blood testing or anything like that. And I only know of one competitor who has ever explicitly said that he takes a particular formula. And I don't know if he still does. So I'll just keep that name private. But in any case, I've only ever heard it once. And quite frankly, I'm pretty sure he would be the first to admit that it's not really about a competitive advantage. He's doing it because he's a well fit individual, so it's probably part of training. But my opinion on nootropics is that that's a deviation from just getting your foundational diet in order. And so really I would focus on that. Before you add anything, I would suggest focusing on what you're going to take away. Yeah, because that's usually the problem.
Once again, building that foundation correctly, right? If it's not set, then there's no point.
Everything else falls away. Have you found that in using these practices and these exercises that people improve their just random memory? Because obviously this is very specific stuff like, hey, I'm learning a language, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But in doing that, do they then start to remember awesome things from back in their life because they're using those events to build their memory palace?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one, actually, because on the one hand, if you don't use the tools to make associations, you're just like everybody else. It's like, they're like Batman. If he doesn't take his utility belt, who cares? All the kung fu in the world, everybody knows that you get hit in the back of the head, you're done. Yeah. So if he doesn't have his helmet on and all that jazz, it doesn't really matter. But by the same token, when you have a really well-trained memory, I know this in my own practice, and I've heard it from multiple competitors, and we've seen it in action where they'll just have like a few seconds to look at the last couple of cards, and they won't encode it, but they'll get them anyway. So I really don't know the answer to that, but I think that ultimately there's just a common sense answer, which is that when your skills of observation are that honed, you're going to get a memory advantage. But, if I did, and I asked you before if I got it, right? If I didn't make a little image for Stacy, right?
Yeah.
I just wouldn't have it. Like, I'd just be like anybody else. So I need to make the association or it's gone.
Can I ask what my association is?
Yeah. Well, I thought of Stacy, what's his name? Keach. I think he's an Australian actor, isn't he?
Yeah.
And so you guys, right in your lovely mise en scène here, are in a bit of a fist fight. So, and I had a blip there because I was actually searching, do I know anyone named Stacy? Right. And so, anyway, but yeah, it's one of those things. If I hadn't done that, I just have to ask myself, like, why didn't you, make an association there? And, it happens in everyday life.
Yeah, definitely. Have you ever heard of the book Peak or read it yourself?
It's the one that's Mihai.
Yeah, it talks about him, and it goes deep into deliberate practice.
Right.
And so it's the whole theory is like, if there was the theory that you had to do 10,000 hours of something to be good at it, whereas now they've scrapped that and said, no, as long as you're doing deliberate practice, and every time that you're practicing a skill, it is good practice. It's not fake practice. It's not like where you're thinking about something else or anything like that. It's very deliberate and straight to the point of what this is. So for instance, if I guess going away from the mind practice as such, as if you were doing gym, for instance, and you were doing gym badly compared to doing gym well, like doing a lat pull down stupid compared to doing it like incredibly well, like good technique. And it's saying like that is deliberate practice, and you'll be better off and get better results from it in the long run. And I'd assume that it's very similar. And they actually talk about like the competitive memory, the number memory people. So where they're doing long lists of numbers, they actually talk about it, and I can't quite remember. And that's why I was asking if you'd done it or if you'd read it at all. But it was diving into how they piece them together. So they might read out a number like 1, 1, 7, 8, 9, 5, and instead of saying 1, 1, 9, 7, 8, 5, they would put that as one whole number instead, so they'd piece it together. But yeah, obviously through deliberate practice, they've been able to do that. I guess is that very similar for whenever you are doing bits and pieces with your clientele, just to make sure that they're getting the best out of their practice?
Right. Yeah. Well, deliberate practice is a very, very important concept, and I was telling you about recalling things in a memory palace out of order. Well, that's related to deliberate practice in music, for example.
Yep.
So, musicians will understand this effect where you make a mistake in a song and then you have the impulse to go back to the beginning of the song.
Yeah.
and then go all the way to the end, instead of just playing that one passage, then playing the passage with the one after it, and then playing the passage with the one before it, or the bar, I should say, and then, looping all three before and after, then you go back to the beginning of the song. So that's sort of what we're talking about. Now, I was trying to listen to your question, so I didn't try to encode those numbers that you just threw out at me.
No, that's fine.
But if I was practicing, it is a discipline in the memory competitions, which is heard numbers, where they will recite numbers. My strategy would be, and other people have different strategies, my strategy would be to hear 2 digits at a time and use a 00 to 99 PAO, which means that there's a figure for every single 2-digit number.
Yeah.
So I think you said 11 in there.
Yeah.
And to me, that would be the toad from the Warner Brothers cartoons. Mm-hmm. Now, some of them, the guys who are super competitive, they have an image for every 3 digits. Yeah, and so that allows them to chunk with greater precision, so to speak, because they need fewer images to get more numbers.
And so it becomes a story in their mind, like the dog chased the kangaroo that was punching the cogs in the cave.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what matters is, and there's different ways to do it, but it matters that whatever that image is for that 2 or 3 digit number is always that image. And so the PAO stands for person, action, object. Mm-hmm. So it's not just that, say 11 is a toad, but that the toad is punching Todd with a teddy bear or something, Ted, or whatever. Or there's a TED Talk sign.
Yeah.
Because one is a T or a D and one is a T or a D. So you figure out whatever a person is and an action is and an object is that fits those words. And so then if it's 35, well, that's a mailman with a mule sending the mail into part of the mule's body, perhaps, or whatever. Right? So you have the person, action, and object. I find in everyday life, you don't need to have a person, action, object for everything. What I rather think about is what is the object that could be a verb or could be an action, something like that. So like my 59, for example, is Jennifer Lopez, and she's just leaping with leopard print pants on. So she's always the action and the object at the same time. I don't necessarily need some special thing, but I don't compete except for charity, and so I haven't really jumped into that whole realm. But that's pretty much how they do it, and they would train just in a dedicated way, specifically for hearing the numbers and encoding them into memory, which would be different than seeing numbers on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess relating this into everyday life, for someone who maybe doesn't have any interest in putting it towards a competition, for instance, what are the big key aspects, I guess, that people would really get out of doing like one of your programs or something like this?
Well, in the community I have created and continue to grow and be blessed to be able to do so, we are primarily focused on large learning projects. Mm-hmm. So languages, or if you're an entrepreneur, and you're in a very specific area, you might have a lot of technological things that you need to deal with, or concepts related to that, or names. I consider names a lifelong learning project. Yeah. It pays off big time, for sure, over time. And just the fulfillment that comes from that, and like learning facts about people, when their birthdays are, et cetera, is very rewarding in many ways. And then also just someone who wants brain fitness. They want to be sharp. They want to be really focused in the moment, and they just want to have high performance abilities to be present to information and not lose it. Those are the kind of people that I really am passionate about helping, and anyone who has doubts, because I am known to turn around the biggest skeptics and the biggest doubters just by being me. So
that's unreal.
I feel like it would be useful for trivia players as well.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's just a matter of what's the strategy that you're going to need to get where you want to go, and then doing the foundations and having fun while you do it, which is totally doable.
Yeah. Now, something like, for instance, there's apps that you can get on your phone that have mind games or memory test things. Do these things work? Will they help to improve your memory at all, or is it like, no, that is proven wrong, it's just a game, and this is what you should actually kind of be doing instead?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's an interview on my podcast with Christine Till, and she did research into CogMed, and the answer is that the apps tend to only have a result if you follow up with human coaching, which is a very interesting finding. Yeah. So, and what's so interesting about that is it's the same thing with a course, right? You know, you got to combine self-study with some kind of community or some kind of personal contact or whatever with humans and anything that pushes you towards implementation. But there's really no good evidence that apps do anything. And there was the famous Luminosity lawsuit, which they apparently just changed whatever crime that they were committing, and they're still going. But that was a huge lawsuit because they were making claims that just don't hold up to scientific scrutiny. And quite frankly, here's the issue at the end of the day from my perspective. There's some pretty good software I've seen that will help you, for example, train your memory to remember names. The problem is you don't memorize names in apps in real life.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what's so interesting to me is that you can be skilled through apps to be good in the game environment in a way that has absolutely minimal or no translation to everyday life. Same thing with, I've been invited to language learning conferences, polyglots. Some of my best friends and advisors and whatnot are world-renowned polyglots and so forth. And we go there, and people are like, I got all the badges on this or that software. I've been through all the levels. I'm like, yeah, I have been too. And, you know, none of us can speak a language just because we can play the game and win the game. You've got to go out. You've got to speak. You've got to put it through that reading, writing, speaking, listening. So there's no hope that the apps are ever going to do it because you need the real world application and implementation. So my policy is lay the foundations first, then let the apps supplement, not the other way around.
I was listening to a podcast with your business partner that's part of Genius Network, who just did a podcast recently, and I was listening to that, and he said, like, even though he helps to teach people how to learn languages, he still has language coaches because he doesn't know the language to start with. So you need to still have that foundation from someone else to be able to build your own foundation. He's like, he didn't know that there were 6 different words for clean in Russian, but his language coach did. And so she taught him these things and had it in the back of her head the whole time, but taught him layer by layer to be able to build it up. Whereas if he had to do that research by himself, it becomes a whole different game, like a whole different ball. I think that's why it is so important to make sure that you've got a coach to help you out with these things.
Oh yeah, and it's the same. It doesn't have to do with language as such. It has to do with all knowledge, right? Because knowledge is not in books, knowledge is not in apps, knowledge is not in courses. Knowledge is in implementation, and it is in action that is in, let me say, assemblage with other human beings, in connection with other human beings, in collaboration with them. And it's in communication. Everything is in the field of sharing. And if you just think for a second that you're going to unlock real knowledge of anything from books only or courses only or apps only, then that's a dangerous proposition, and the ROI is going to be quite low. So you've got to take it into the world, because humans are the ultimate information storage and retrieval device, and we can really capitalize on that when we take it, whatever we want to learn, into the real world and process it through the muscle memory of the mouth, the muscle memory of the ears. And it's just like how you and I met at the Dean Jackson event. Like, we all said, or everybody said in their own way, or we were chatting, it's like, yeah, well, you know, there's nothing we haven't heard before. Yeah, but yet it's like 1,000 times more valuable precisely because we're putting it into the world and we're having all those multi-sensory muscle memories being worked and developed and strengthened, and then we go away supercharged and passionate again. So that's
really cool. I think
it's
that's
just the way it is.
I think that's why, like, for instance, YouTube how-to videos are so popular, because it's that learning method, and it's like, hey, how can I get visual interaction as well as probably like you listening, hearing interaction, like you're getting multiple different levels of learning straight away from it.
And then you do it. Like if you're watching something, you're normally doing it at the same time that they're doing it, so that you're
exactly
actioning it as well. This is going to sound like a really weird question. I don't know if you've been asked this before, but your job is obviously to help people improve their memory. What if there's things that people are trying to forget, like, you know, repressing certain things, and then as you're helping them with their memory, they're starting to remember these things they don't want to remember. Can you help people to forget as well?
Well, I'd rather not work on forgetting, but I'd rather work on being comfortable with what's there and turning it into either something that rests peacefully or that is a tool for a powerful use. So we have all had that. I've had that. I mean, there's a breakup I went through one time, and here I'm this memory expert, and I can't get her out of my head. So I just worked with it. And I did the old Benjamin Franklin thing, you know, like the pro and the con, and was just like, what are all the pros of everything that happened and the breakup and all that jazz, and what are all the cons? We're on the way. My roommate, I was so despondent, and he was like, what are you going to do? I said, we got to go to Rome. He's like, you're coming. So he's driving to Rome. We're halfway to Bologna, and I'm just sitting there writing out all the pros and cons and just letting myself be with her in memory and sort it out, instead of continually having it come up unwanted. Just face it head on. And then, and it just, you know, it wasn't like 100% instant resolved, but it was the big sweeping move that I needed to do. And then it just, now I have nothing but really amazing memories, actually. Like I can zero in on all of the crap and garbage if I want, but I've just turned it into it's just this amazing thing. And I'm super grateful that I had her in my life, even though it went the way it went.
That is super powerful. I reckon a lot of people can learn from that.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you for
sharing.
sharing.
It's the same thing with certain experiences I've had in my life with depression and so forth. You know, going to see certain doctors who gave advice that was obviously not right for me. And, you know, you can sit there and focus on, oh, damn, you know, that guy really chewed up 2 years of my life on some pill that obviously wasn't right. Or you can say, wow, what was that guy's name? And could I use that room as a memory palace and just remember some tools for like dealing with the past and getting over it? And like it's way better that way, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's turning all negatives into a positive to some extent.
Yeah, seeing the silver lining.
Something that you often hear a lot of, like, I guess, memory coaches talk about is speed reading. Why is that so efficient or so effective to someone who is obviously getting a bigger base or a bigger broad memory? Right.
Well, speed reading is really the domain of my friend you mentioned, Jonathan Levy from Superlearner.
Yeah.
And I don't teach it, and I don't do it. I do what I often jokingly call slow reading, and so I'm serious about it because it's not to deny the value of learning speed reading tricks. It's just that I don't take any pleasure in it, and I've taken what I think is the best from it, which is usually called priming or pre-reading. And then I've thought, now that we've done that, let's slow down and actually remember what it is that we need to learn based on understanding. And so speed reading has, and I think any speed reading expert will agree with this, speed reading has a time, it has a place, it has an outcome. I just don't think it's in my world because I needed to read really quickly and efficiently and thoroughly to develop the foundations of knowledge, which ultimately meant slowing down and making sure I really understood what the heck it was that I was memorizing, but also being willing to sort of let go of the outcome so that connections can emerge in other texts. And so I think that one of the problems with speed reading is that it's not a problem with speed reading itself, it's the intent that people bring with it that comes from a scarcity mindset around time.
Yeah.
So I'm not a naysayer about it. I just think that it's misplaced in people's strategy. And so that's where I would start and advise people to really think about its strategical use. And in that case, I do teach speed reading because I've taken the best from it and just and then once we speed up, we slow down.
Yeah.
So.
It reminds me of a saying that we use often just in the sport realm, which is smooth is slow, slow is fast. And it's so true, because it's like you can go and speed demon your way through it, and you'll end up doing something wrong along the way, or busting something up, or in this term, like where you're reading a book and you miss a line or you miss a few things, and then all of a sudden you finish the book and you're like, what was that book actually about again? And so it's like, and I think that can kind of be applied to all things in life, really. It's like, take your time with it. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if you guys can get it right the first time, it's going to be a lot more pleasurable, I think. Yeah, exactly. A pleasurable experience for you as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's a lot of power in getting it right the first time, which leads back to, that whole thing of making sure you're taking what you're learning into some kind of community so that you have conversation around it. And that's what can really speed things up, speed your progress, because you're observing how others have interpreted knowledge to help you interpret it better.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned that you do some competitions for charity. What sort of events are they, and like what are the charities that you're usually supporting when you do that?
Right. Well, there was one. I sort of frame it as I only compete for charity, and I'm hoping that there'll be another one that comes up, and I may create one.
Yeah.
But the story behind that was actually, this was the last time I drank alcohol, and it was I was in Vancouver, and then I was going to report as a sort of journalist on a memory competition in Toronto. And somehow I got into a drinking situation with some of my friends in Vancouver, and I wound up super roasted on the plane to Toronto. I didn't sleep because there was this woman there. She was like, "Hey, my name is what was it? Jennifer, and I'm manic depressive." And I was like, "Oh my God, me too." So we just like chatted the whole time. I didn't sleep at all, and get to Toronto, then my buddy is like, "Oh man, you got to come watch this thing. Man, there's a memory competition first thing in the morning." I had no intention of competing, just to report on it. Anyway, I get there. Dave Farrow, I've now had not sleep basically for 2 days, still hungover. I have psoriasis arthritis, so all my joints are on fire. And Dave Farrow's not letting me out of there if I don't compete with him, because he's got 2 Guinness World Records. He wants to see what I'm made of, right? And so I'm watching all these kids that he's got there learning memory techniques so fast. They're competing, they're memorizing stuff. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then finally the cameras are on. This is all like standard competition stuff with the records and all this jazz and being filmed. And I'm just like, oh man, I can't say no to this guy, because he's not going to let me out of here and whatever. So I just said, look, we'll do it for charity. If I win, the money goes to my charity. You win, the money goes to your charity. So that's how we did it. And I would only have it. I had to find a way to convince myself to do it, and that was my solution.
Yeah.
And despite being super hungover, all my joints on fire, I did half as well as the guy with 2 Guinness World Records for playing cards, and I'm pretty excited and proud of that. Because
yeah, definitely.
I probably would have done 3/4 as well if I wasn't in so much pain and suffering.
That's foreign. And so I guess, did you actually mention you've had a lot of health issues over your time? You've had like manic depression and everything that goes on as well with that. And I remember at one point over the Dig Jackson weekend that we had together, you explained how you were bedridden at one time of your life, and that you actually went through quite a health journey and changed your eating and your nutrition and your lifestyle around quite a lot. Can you kind of just briefly touch on that?
Right.
As to what happened and where you're at, and what were the big changes that you had to do to make a big difference?
Well, that's one of the reasons that was the last time I ever drank, because I had quit drinking before that, and it was one of the reasons I got so super drunk, because I was not used to having alcohol in my system. And the reason I quit is because it was April 2013, and I was on tour, or just about to go on tour with a band in Germany. And I stepped up from my desk one day, and it was like my ankle broke. And I was in shock, and I basically got myself over to my girlfriend's place anyway. And in the middle of the night, I was just sweating bullets and called the doctor. The doctor's like, "You got gout for sure." And I was like, how is this possible? And like none of my foods suggested that this would be the outcome, except for drinking, because played in a band in Germany, had memory techniques, don't need to be sober. But in any case, I had to change everything, and I spent a year on a gout diet, and I kept getting, like, I already had like this padding from years of lithium, but I started getting fatter and fatter and fatter, and we're just like, what the heck is going on here? A gout diet is basically just Mediterranean stuff. But it turns out it wasn't gout. It was psoriasis arthritis. And a doctor just noticed one day, he's like, has anybody ever asked you if you have psoriasis? I was like, yeah, I've had psoriasis. And he's like, I bet you have psoriasis arthritis. And so that's what it was. And everything on that gout diet was pretty much a nightshade, or like all the stuff that's going to agitate the heck out of a guy with psoriasis arthritis. So then, anyway, to make a long story short, I hired some health people, because the medical system that made this mistake in the first place was obviously going nowhere. And they helped me do what's called an elimination diet, leading to a rotation diet. And we went to the nth degree of my blood and my fluids and all that jazz. And over 6 months, got me on a diet that is really strict, but has paid off in a big way. Now I can walk. I can. I'm pretty much pain-free, except for a little aches and whatnot here and there, especially if I feel it. But I'm at the gym 3 times a week, and just doing stuff I never even would have dreamed possible before that I had that breakdown.
Yeah, I remember you actually carry a card around with you. It's like your little cheat sheet for foods you can eat, foods you can't eat, and foods that are kind of all right, but will cause some issues later.
Right. And incidentally, I mean, even with that card, I still wasn't disciplined enough at the restaurants there, because when I came home, like, my skin was just going crazy and my joints were crazy for a good week and a half afterwards.
Yeah.
Just because, you can't, and I don't regret it, but no matter what you say, someone's going to put olive oil in it, even though you tell them not to, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I'm still, like, overall, I'm just in so much bliss. And it goes back to the manic depression thing, because I'm not so convinced that I ever really had manic depression. I think I had a lot of food sensitivities. And we just learned this over the months of testing. Like, we got down to, like, why do I have this complete insane sense of impulses and urges and, like, weird crap going on? And it's just like, it turns out that if I bake apples, I'm fine. I eat a raw apple, I want to jump off the balcony. And it's like, I'm starting to write a book on it, because I really want to get the word out about the power of elimination dieting and rotation dieting for anybody who, I mean, I'll be the first to admit that it takes a lot of discipline.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is the suffering of figuring out these different ways of eating is so much less than the suffering of pain and suicidal impulses. I can tell you that.
Absolutely.
And I'm so glad to be free of it.
Yeah, if you've improved your quality of life just by having to change the food that you eat, then that's a pretty good way to do it. It's awesome.
Oh, yeah. Again, it's just like, what would you take away instead of what would you add? And I the odd time I'll have ice cream, and I'll pay for it.
Yeah.
But it's such a minimal payment, just simply because I'm so consistent and regular, and I can't afford not to be, because my whole life could fall apart from an apple.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the hard thing is that we deal with a lot of people who will be like, well, I don't want to get rid of gluten, or I don't want to get rid of dairy, because I don't know what bad it's doing to me. So I'm better to not know than to find out what it is and find my exactly. And it's like, how do you even change someone's mindset when they're like that until they've gone through a situation of extreme pain to some extent? It seems like sometimes you can't change people's mind, unfortunately. And it's like...
It comes back to that experiential thing we were talking about, even with memory. Like, once they trial it and they experience, as you were going to say, Maddie, before I interrupted you, their new normal, that they realize that they can be pain-free and live a really happy, healthy life with improved quality of life.
Yeah, well, I don't know what you guys think about free will, but I think there's not really any good evidence that there is free will. And so the cool thing about the internet and the kind of marketing that one can do on the internet is just like, hey, raise your hand for this. If you want it, here's how it works. Yeah. And it's just a numbers game after that. And you serve as many people as you can. And you do it in a way that's, just honest and authentic to whatever you can do to help them, and let the numbers sort out the rest, because you can't lead a horse to drink, but you can certainly have a YouTube channel and a podcast or whatever the heck it is that you want to do to just spread the good news to those who will listen. So
find your 5-star prospect, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Or,
Yeah, unreal. Well, what we might do is we'll start to wrap up, Anthony. So we've got 2 last questions that we ask all of our listeners, all of our guests. Sorry. The first one being is, what is your biggest fear?
My biggest fear really is that despite all that I do to train my brain and train my body and be disciplined with my diet, I'll wind up with something like Alzheimer's or dementia anyway, or even some cruel twist of fate because I've invested so much in it. I'm not really afraid of it, but it is on my mind. And I do think about it. I think about it not just for my benefit, but also for the benefit of the people I serve.
Yeah,
that's pretty scary. Well, the final question is, what's your biggest drive? Like, what gets you out of bed every day? What's your passion?
Well, it's really these stories that I get pretty much every day where someone's like, I got 85% on my test, or I just, finally am able to speak Polish with my in-laws, or, these stories of transformation is what drives me. And I sometimes berate myself as an entrepreneur for still being in my inbox, but I'm pretty addicted to these stories, and they come frequently enough that it's worth it. And I'm really patched into the community that I'm creating as much as I can be, because it just puts so much wind in my sails when people get it, when it clicks, and they're off to the races and their whole lives are transformed because they understand what their memory really is. So that's what drives me is the truth about memory for each individual who's willing to come to the art and the science and the craft of it.
Yeah, that's unreal.
So cool.
So if people want to get involved with either yourself or with Magnetic Memory Method, what are the best ways to kind of get in contact and follow along?
Well, if you visit magneticmemorymethod.com, there's really no hiding the opportunity to take my free course. It's 4 videos. You get 3 PDFs that walk you through the creation of a Memory Palace network, because quite frankly, one Memory Palace will never cut it. You'll never really experience spatial mapping and spatial memory without that, at least multiple Memory Palaces. So I kind of overkill it with the 26 thing just to help people get at least enough to unlock what spatial memory is really about as a tool. And that's just at magneticmemorymethod.com. We got almost 250 podcast episodes. There's 400 plus videos on YouTube. I mean, whatever your preference is, we got it pretty much. So that's all at the hub of magneticmemorymethod.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Anthony. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good to know, I guess, a little bit of a background in regards to how you can actually build a better memory. But also, it's also nice to know, like, you do have to build your foundation like everything else. It's not just a quick fix. And I don't know whether people are always looking for that or not, but it's cool to see.
It's a rewarding challenge.
Exactly.
Well, we've got a community of people who are really serious. They get it. I think of it as a kind of martial art. So it's just a martial art where all the students are also teachers, and we don't have belts or competitions or anything like that. We're just there to figure out the next move and to do it wisely with strategy to get those outcomes, whatever they may be.
Martial arts without the ego.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Well, my favorite quote from Bruce Lee ever is "No ego, no enemy." So, and that's what we work on.
That's unreal. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.